There is nothing quite as wonderful as homemade sourdough bread with its crackly crust, fluffy interior, and tangy flavor. However, if you're new to sourdough baking, keeping up with the starter can feel very overwhelming. So here are the top 5 common concerns and myths that scare many new sourdough bakers. Myth number 1, sourdough hooch means trouble. Hooch is the liquid that forms on the top of the starter. The longer the starter sits, the darker the hooch will become. The development of hooch is incredibly normal, and in short, it just means your starter needs to be fed. To handle the starter at this point, stir the hooch in and discard of half. You will then feed it 150 grams of flour and 150 grams of water. Stir well and then cover and let the starter sit and do its thing. Myth number 2, perfect timing is key. I have had times where my starter is ready in a few hours and other times where it needed longer than 24 hours in between feedings. On average, you'll feed the starter once a day to get it ready to bake bread. Just know the temperature and maturity of the starter can yield variances. Myth number 3, sourdough discard equals waste. To get your starter ready to bake bread, you'll have to feed it for approximately 3 to 5 days in a row. With each feeding, discard of half of the starter. The good news, there are loads of recipes using sourdough discard. However, it's incredibly important to remove half before feeding, as this will control the acidity, producing a better quality loaf of sourdough. Myth number 4, your kitchen needs to be sterile. It's important to have a clean kitchen and to use properly washed tools and utensils. However, sourdough is very forgiving. A bit of bacteria won't hurt your starter. Myth number 5, neglect spells doom. To film this, I let my starter sit on the kitchen counter for 3 weeks to show what neglect looks like. If you leave your starter alone for an extended period of time, more than likely you will develop a layer of hooch that darkens. All is okay with this. When neglect becomes a problem is when mold develops. Basically, mold will look fuzzy and chances are have any of the colors of the rainbow. I do recommend to periodically wash your starter jar, as it can become very crusty after a while. How often you wash it depends on how often you're feeding your sourdough starter. Within the recipe post for how to maintain sourdough starter, I address everything from the types of flour and water to use to the many common questions that can trip up a new sourdough baker. Just know though, that making homemade sourdough bread is so much easier than it seems. For more recipes like this and for weekly inspiration, make sure to head on over to thefedupfoodie.com and sign up for my newsletter where I share recipes and tips in helping to make cooking from scratch approachable.